You you ever been to Wisconsin? Well, they have some of the coldest winters around. I grew up there near Chippewa Falls. If you guys saw the title of this video, you know what film that is from. Just one thing I have in common with Mr. Jack Dawson. But as far as how am I linking this to our current predicament, that is the pandemic. I rewatched the Titanic last week and seen it probably since I was a child. And it's a 3-hour movie, a long film. And if you know anything about me, I often have trouble staying seated for films and finishing films in one attempt, especially if they're not very good. But even if they are, good, I'm just kind of ADHD. But I did not get up once during my rewatching of that film last week. And it is such a microcosm, I think, that whole event, which I think the film does a great job of portraying, of all of humanity. You see the best and the worst of humanity portrayed in that film. And the thing is, that's crazy, is it actually happened. Whether it's the musicians playing pretty much to the death, all musicians died and they played until they could not play any longer. As the ship sank, they played, to their deaths, literally. Or Captain Smith going down with the ship bravely when he probably could have saved himself. Or Thomas Andrews, who's the architect of the ship, and his going down with the ship as well. And probably the disappointment he felt, I'm sure he felt, in not creating a ship that was more indestructible, right? And the setting too, which is the ship, for most of the film, the setting is the Titanic itself. And at the time, it was the height of human architectural achievement by Mr. Andrews. Especially in maritime sphere, right? In the maritime sphere, it was the greatest achievement that man had ever done. The greatest thing that man had created that touched the ocean, right? So despite it being, man's greatest achievement up to that point in that sphere, it didn't matter. It wasn't good enough to, despite the amazing achievement that it was no match for Mother Nature. So it kind of shows, in that sense, the futility of man in a way. We can create something as, collectively we can, as magnificent as the RMS Titanic, but it still won't matter because Mother Nature is still more powerful. And like I said, you see not only the best of humanity in that film and in that event, but also the worst as well, whether it's, people, trying to push each other off the ship, or, pushing each other out of the way to try to save themselves, once fear takes a hold. And there's one guy in particular who is portrayed in the film as well. He was the highest ranking uh, person who was associated with the Freightliner company to survive, and he, from what I read, to the end of his days, never really lived that down because there were women and children that died. And that's another thing too, which I think portrays humanity on that scale within the realm of the Titanic as well, is the desire to protect the children and the women as well. I believe of the passengers that died, that either drowned or froze to death, 90% of them were male, and the 10% that didn't make it, who were women and children, were, of course, third class, which is, you know, it says something else about humanity and how humans treat their poor, the poorest among us, as well, which again is portrayed in that microcosm of the Titanic. So, you know, you see, like I said earlier, kind of almost every aspect of humanity on display in that environment. Should we walk up here a bit? And again, the worst as well, right? When fear takes a hold of people. If you guys can see that deer right about 20 yards behind me. It's a doe. She's been watching me this whole time. See if I can zoom in. gonna give her some space. I didn't even see her. It's amazing how quiet they are. That hissing sound you heard, they make that when they are nervous. And you could see her stomping too. They do that to try to get a reaction out of the animal that they're looking at. I noticed that too when they're if you've ever been hunting and they come up to you and the first time they see you, their depth perception is actually not that good. And you saw that too. She was kind of moving her head up and down because I wasn't. I was keeping very still. Yeah, this woods area I'm in is quite small, so I think that's why she didn't want to get kicked out, because there's not a whole lot of places to go. So I'm gonna give her some space. But pretty small doe, probably only weighed about 100 pounds, looks like. So she's probably about 2 years old, from what I would guess. But you ever been to Wisconsin? They have some of the coldest winters around. I grew up there near Chippewa Falls. Where was I? I was talking about the Titanic. So, to me, it just looks like a... You know, I was watching this video of this British man, and he posted it on his Facebook, and it kind of went viral a little bit. I didn't sleep last night. Again, it's one of those sleepless nights, of which there have been many this year. Definitely, I've never had so many sleepless nights until this year. But you know, I watched that video and I just couldn't. You know, I had to say something, and you know, as it relates to this pandemic, another thing too you saw with the people on the Titanic was you know, people kind of not accepting reality. You know, especially among the upper classes, the first class passengers. You know, they were just expecting it to be a drill, and then they could get back to their tea and brandy and cigars and whatnot. And I think you're seeing that all those things that I mentioned here with this pandemic as well. And the latter thing I just mentioned is what concerns me the most, because I mean, I still think young people are just disenfranchised. I think they feel extremely disenfranchised. And I just read a stat earlier this morning that millennials and Zoomers now make up the majority of Americans, as of, I think it was 2019. So over half Americans are millennials or Zoomers. And, you know, reading that stat too and just tying it into what I said about, you know, people who on the Titanic weren't seeing reality. They weren't seeing the danger of the situation. They couldn't believe that she could sink. But she did sink. And Mr. Andrews even said, it's a mathematical certainty. Once he came to know the knowledge, the facts, right? Thomas Andrews, the architect, he said, it's a mathematical certainty. This ship will sink. And some people just refused to believe it, and they froze to death when they perhaps could have survived. And I think we're seeing that here too with, you know, I think a lot of young people, they just feel like they can't make a difference in the political sphere. They feel like it's pointless. And I certainly felt like that for many years, you know, to the point of actively not only disengaging, but trying to repel and ignore anything political because I just felt is useless. But you know, as I said before, I got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore, and I think a lot of the young people are making up that group of people that were on the Titanic. That kind of refused to see reality. They couldn't accept the fact that she was sinking, that she could sink. But I don't think it's just young people too. It's, you know, maybe the older people who have long trusted the media, the institutions, and getting over that cognitive dissonance or the former, you know, belief that you had in such an institution, the trust, you know, breaking trust in something like that, in anything, you know, whether it's a person or an institution. I think there's almost an inevitable active resistance that goes on where you don't want to believe that the trust is broken when it clearly has been. But going back to the youth, it reminds me of when I was talking to Ryan about his fatalistic youth essay. And I think a lot of young people are fatalistic. I think he was right on that. And this ties into this pandemic, and they just feel like they're in a movie, you know, or they just feel like there's no point in saying anything and speaking up. But you know, after watching the video of that guy on Facebook, and this is a 30-something-ish year old, an Xer, I think, young Xer, and he was scared to say anything until this week. You know, imagine what, you know, young people are dealing with. And now it's not to say that I'm, you know, because I do care what my peers think about me still, but I try not to let those, you know, those thoughts dictate how I behave, right? And that's another conversation. But you know, just watching that Titanic last week and getting really affected by it, and then watching that guy speak up this morning, it made me think of that film and that historical event. And I've been reading about it just because since I watched it last week, I've just been so interested in it, because it's just such a crazy, you know, happenstance of the height of human achievement at the time. No match for Mother Nature. No match for an iceberg in the frigid North Atlantic. And all the human aspects of it that go, you know, that went with that tragedy, right? It reminds me of World War II in that sense. You see, you know, every aspect of the human condition, as I said, within that 2 hours and 40 minutes, right? From the time the iceberg hit to the time it foundered. The musicians playing, Captain Smith going down with the ship, the men in charge who you know, tried to save the women and children. You know, 90% of those who died, again, or froze to death or drowned, were men. And then there is the socioeconomic aspect of the human condition as well, where those 10% of women and children who did die, they weren't first class, they were third class. And how they tried to keep the third class people locked in their living quarters, because they didn't want, they were just scared, you know. And people do crazy things when they're scared, when they're fearful. You know, fear makes people do crazy things behavior-wise. So, you know, I just felt compelled to speak on this and to implore anybody who may see this, you know, few people as it may be, to speak up in any way they can, or whether that's, you know, making a video like this, or just doing something as simple as speaking to family, right? Because that's something I'm going to do later today. I'm going to visit my grandparents, and they definitely have their political opinions, and they're not very closely aligned to mine, especially at this time. But, you know, I think I'm going to make it a point to try to be honest with them about what I think is going on. And, yeah, all those things that have happened in the past week or so have really inspired me to do that and to make this video. Titanic, COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of similarities that may not be readily apparent to some, but I think people are so fascinated with that event, even to this day, is because it showed every aspect of the human condition, all within 2 hours and 40 minutes. Stay frosty. All the best. Respect Mother Nature. Until next time, people.